Hello, hello. Welcome, everyone. I'll give everyone a moment to connect to sound here. Hello, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 1304th New Social Environment. I'm Joshua, a programs associate here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Alejandro Cartagena and Charlotte Kent. And now I'll introduce today's guest and host. Born in Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic in 1977, Alejandro Cartagena lives and works in Monterrey, Mexico. Over the last 2 decades, his projects have employed landscape photography and portraiture as a means to examine social, urban, and environmental issues. His work has been exhibited at more than 50 group and solo exhibitions, including the Centre de Cultura Contemporània de Barcelona and the Fondation Cartier in Paris. Our host today, Associate Professor of Visual Culture at Montclair State University, Dr. Charlotte Kent, is an editor at large for the Brooklyn Rail and a contributor to assorted books on art and technology, including as co-editor of Contemporary Absurdities, Existential Crises, and Visual Art, co-author of Midnight Moment, A Decade of Artists in Times Square, and editor of Generation to Generation. And with that, I'll go ahead and pass the mic over to Charlotte.
Thank you, Joshua, and thank you everyone at the Rail and everyone who's here today. Alejandro, thank you so much for joining me. It is such a pleasure to have another conversation with you. I have had the pleasure of knowing him for a few years and having conversations about photography, about the art world and all of its various changes. And of course, it was a huge honor to be asked by the curator of your show at SF MoMA Ground Rules when Shana Lopez asked me if I would do an interview with you for the book. But before we get into all of these things, I wanted to just welcome everyone by putting us in the room of the show. And there's a lot of gorgeous installation shots, and we'll see some of them. But one of the reasons I wanted to start with this one is because as we go through Alejandro's practice today, I think one of the things that will really come across is the way in which he moves between people and questions of identity and representation, and structures, both social, environmental, and political. And so this moment in the exhibition really sort of captures some of those things. So with that, if we can go to the next slide, Alejandro, I wanted to sort of start by just having us talk a little bit about the movement of your practice across these sort of 20 years that this show is really presenting. It's
Wow.
excellent.
Yes. Well, thank you, Charlotte, for having me and Brooklyn Rail. It's such an honor to be here. I've had different conversations in the past with you guys, and it's been delightful. And with this exhibition as context for the conversation, I'm still overwhelmed. I was telling the whole team, the Brooklyn team, how I still have a little bit of imposter syndrome to have an institution of this magnitude to pay attention to all the different ideas that I've had over 20 years. It's kind of mind blowing, and I've never seen a lot of the work combine and talk to each other the way that it does in this exhibition. So I mean, again, I'm still out of words of excitement of this opportunity. And I'll end my first response with, I have been obsessed over things, and those obsessions have been mutating over the years. But I've become more and more convinced that this thing that is out there in the world, that people say that an artist only has one thing to say, they just reframe it in a million different ways. I think it's been there all along, these ideas, and I've just been like looking at it from different perspectives. And yeah, anyways, that's, I hope that makes sense.
Well, we'll actually wind up talking a little bit about even the title of the show, right? But before we
Yes.
get to all of that, it's funny. I mean, it's always funny to hear an artist that so many people respect, like you, talk about something like imposter syndrome, especially in the context of the fact that I think so many of your images of people really make this concerted effort, as I think we see here, to take us away from people's anxieties about how they
Mm.
appear and some of that. So could you just talk a little bit about this particular project, which is one of
Sure.
the early ones, and because these are large images too.
Yes. Yeah. So, to put into context what was happening while this work was being done, and I think it's important to talk about. This is 2005. I had left my career in the service industry. I was working in hotels and restaurants for over 10 years, and suddenly I stumbled upon this medium which I knew I kind of liked, and I knew that it was capable of telling stories, which is photography. And it suddenly became this place where I was told that with a camera, looking at people, looking at places, you can express things that you have in your mind. And one thing that inevitably has been part of a lot of my practice is, and these ideas that recur, is that who am I in this place that I live in? I am an immigrant from Dominican Republic to Mexico. I'm not from there. I'm not from here. If I go there, I'm not completely from there. From here, I'm always seen as an outsider, but yet I talk about the place I am in constantly. And so this, I think, was the first project, and I've talked about this in psychoanalysis, how I was trying to understand who who am I looking at other people, and this obsessiveness of almost like systematic way of portraying people. We did 800 portraits of people over a 1 year span. We traveled around the whole state of Nuevo León. This is in northern Mexico, just south of Texas. And we were encountering people outside churches, outside stores, malls, anywhere they would let us put our little white backdrop, and we would ask them, if we can take pictures of them for a project about the phenotype of the Northern Mexican. And, in retrospect, it was a very naive proposition because everybody looks like everybody in Mexico. But what ended up being the result of that is inadvertently kind of the style of the first 10 years of, this new century was emerging in terms of the objects that people carried, cell phones, the styles, the groups, the ideas projected through indumentaria. Indumentary, is that a word? No, indumentaria. In Mexico, in Spanish, we call it indumentaria, is the things people wear. And instead of finding a phenotype, we kind of documented how people look at the beginning of the 21st century in Mexico, and specifically northern Mexico.
It's also, I mean, this is a moment where, I think you've spoken about like you were thinking about photography, you had been looking at not only huge archives of photography, but also photographers who had done not dissimilar projects, August
Yes.
Sander, Richard Avedon, and then there's, and I'm probably going to mispronounce his name, but Juan Rodrigo Yan.
Yaguno.
Yeah, Uno. Okay.
Mhm.
Um, and so, I think it's interesting also just to recall the way in which, um, you're being influenced by the people who are in front of you and as you're taking images of them, but you're also, in the background, there's these influences of other photographers and what they've modeled for you as well.
Yeah.
Um, We'll keep going just because I want us to move through some of these early
Yes.
bodies of work so that we can sort of situate some of the larger conversations. Um, this is a project, True Dead, and it's obviously not people. Um, but there's a simplicity to it that winds up having a kind of aesthetic or formal connection. But can you tell us a little bit about this one?
Sure. So I love how Shayna worked. When we were doing the curation for the exhibition, we looked at everything that I've done. And she really picked out projects that encompass several of the preoccupations that were in my practice and in my thinking at those particular times. And here is, let's say, my introduction to digital photography and this possibility of digital manipulating images. And what you're seeing here seems, as you mentioned, and it kind of shows that the work does actually work. It's tricking you to that, oh my God, this is very simple. It's very simple representations of space, of place. There's no inhabitants there, ordinary moments. But in reality, these are heavily manipulated digital images where I've basically created a maquette of the place by stripping all the trash, all the graffiti, all the cracks in the concrete. Everything has been restored to its idealistic view of that place. And so this was, I mean, it maybe seems silly now, but that was a discovery. Like, oh my God, you can make photographic images that are supposed to be indexical and are supposed to contain truth, and yet you can manipulate that. You can make it seem that way. But the reality of the object that you've produced is not that. And that contradiction was a revelation for me. Again, I think I was like a year into my practice as an artist, and it was again revolutionary, emotional, exciting, and maybe we'll talk about it further in our conversation. But one of the things that why I've kind of had a sort of kinship with AI imaging, it's that what AI images do is have that layer of the photographicness, but yet the way it's produced, you can jump all of the problems of photography and go directly to the imagined place. And so, to some extent, if AI generated images would have been as perfect as they are today, maybe these images would have been AI generated if I had access to those tools. Because in the end, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to play with that connotation that we project onto photographic images or images that look like photographs, and play with the viewer that, oh my God, this is just a simple place. But no, it's a construction of the idea of a place.
But I also think, and I think we'll wind up talking about this too. I mean, the idealism that you're invoking in these images, by removing, like you said, the trash, the detritus, the inconvenient, um, the anything that distracts from the idealized view, is a part of, um, also a set of political concerns with
Yes.
so many of the places that you have consistently gone to and looked at. So,
Yes.
um,
Yes, and
okay.
and there is there is no denying that the place we live in is constantly projecting onto our identity and our preoccupations of the self. And what was happening around the picturing of these images or creating these images is that a whole new Mexico was being built around the Mexico that I had grown up in. And it was this suburbanization we'll talk about, but those were projections of what does it mean to be a homeowner in Mexico. And here's the government facilitating these idealized suburban places where every house is perfectly built and painted. And it doesn't end up being that way, but somehow I was seeing that over and over again every time I was traveling around the metropolitan area. that now in retrospect, I was like being influenced to this constant propaganda of the government talking about these idealized places of home ownership that were being proposed.
Yeah. If we could go to the next one, I want to just pause on this image briefly. You can't really see the photographs for the people in the audience, but the reason I just wanted to have us have this one here for a moment is one of the, I think, really wise things that Shana Lopez identified was the way in which your practice produces visual constellations. And that's the phrase she uses, is visual constellations. And I think that the way in which the works were installed curatorially for the exhibition really makes an active effort to highlight that and to bring it forward. So if we move to the next image, one of the reasons I wanted to just pause there is as you're looking at the next set of images, you're going to see how that's happening, but seeing those two walls meet with those sets of images really brought that forward. So anyway, to keep going through the sort of chronological narrative, then we get to Turismo, and this is this is you, in fact, feeling like
Yeah.
a tourist in these places you remember. So,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. This is again, you point out the idea of constellations. Another of the curators at SF MoMA calls it hyperlinks. There's always these interconnections between the different series, and maybe what you were saying was more the visual, but then there is the connections of the content itself and what is being addressed. And here you have this representation of a body that, again, the image, you can't see it closely, but that body is completely out of focus. And what is in focus is that background, that idea of place, which sat in my memory for many years after leaving Dominican Republic. And then once I'm back in these places, my body is completely displaced. It doesn't belong to this narrative of the place that I thought I grew or that I did grow up in, but that now consciously and emotionally I'm just not there. And so using again a technical aspect of photography to represent that displacement is also interesting, thinking of the other technical aspect of the ciudades pieces. It's using or translating the technicalities or of the medium into how does that translate into a poetic gesture or an artistic gesture. So this I was a tourist, un turista that sees something but doesn't really belong to that place. And then the two vertical, those are places that I lived in, and I started using a media format camera. And again, a technical aspect that then translates into a gesture. That camera kind of obligates you to look at the world from a waist level, because it's not a viewfinder, it's a waist finder. I don't know if that's how you call it, but you have to look down into the camera and then you see the world flipped horizontally. So you're really looking at an abstraction in the camera frame, but you're looking at it from this low level, which kind of mimics how I looked at these places when I was actually living there. So there's something interesting about, again, the technicalities being translated into how I felt about those places.
totally. The
Yeah.
apparatus of the camera could
Mhm.
capture the eye of the child, right?
Yes,
Because of
exactly.
its height. Some of the technicality you're talking about appears in the next image as well. This is a very different technical gesture. And I'm going to sort of let it be okay that we're not looking at these closely because this, the border camera is actually, and this is, I mean, let's talk about the question of photography, right? So you discovered that the US National Park Service had these live cameras at Big Bend on Sierra del Carmen. And so you were going online and
Yes.
looking at it and capturing screenshots, right?
Yes.
And so the screenshot becomes the photograph.
Yes.
And I think I just want to like take a moment here because this is a really interesting. I mean, for all the people who are into photography in the room, I think you all know where we're going here. But of course, it's fascinating how that's been um, normalized in some ways because when we take screenshots on our devices, right, they usually
Yes.
go into our photo section, right? So like the screenshot, which in no way relates to photography in its more traditional sense, especially in 2008, right? In 2008, traditional photography discourse, including Aperture, which has published your book, right? Like was
Yes.
not prered for the screenshots to be a photo.
No. Yeah.
Um, so just tell us about how did you think that through for yourself at that moment?
Yeah, this is again another, let's say it's in this same room, this origins room, if we want to call it that, of different things that end up developing in different series. And here is the idea of the internet and the digital image and circulation. These are things that are all contained in this series. I was thinking again, complete discovery. I'm not I'm now a little bit more computer inclined, but back then I was so anti-computers, like I did not want to be on a computer. So I had no ideas of that you can do a screenshot of a screen. That was like novelty. The same as the digital photoshopping. That was again novelty. All this was happening, by the way, we didn't mention it, but I was working I had been working in the service industry. I quit that. Then I had finished a degree in leisure management. I wanted to do art, but I didn't want to go to school to do another 4-year degree. So the next thing that I found was working at a photography center that's also a museum. So I was their digitizer for 5 years and ended up learning about framing, printing, retouching, digital, analog, writing about photography, writing proposals for exhibitions. I mean, I that was a 5 years kind of master's in photography in a place where everything was about photography. So that was right when I was doing this, I was digitizing images from the 1800s and early 1900s, and I had a lot of free time to look at the computer, and I was looking into these another novelty at that time. There were forums where people were sharing how to hack into public available CTV screens, and I honestly I don't know exactly how I ended up in this Big Bend camera, but I got there and I just became so fascinated with the idea of the internet as the camera. It's like this is a mechanism that allows me to see the world, and it allows me to go anywhere that I want. And kind of I mean, the camera is that. It's a mechanism that allows you to frame the world and see something in particular. Yes, your body is related. You're taking your body to place it in front of this thing that you're photographing. But I don't know. I still felt that uh, a photographic connection with doing the screenshot. And I became obsessed and kind of what Shayna talks about in the text. I created a rule. I'm going to go into this camera every day and I'm going to do a screenshot of whatever is there. And you can see the changes in weather. You can see sometimes smugglers. You sometimes see the border patrol. Sometimes you don't see anything. And it was just, why did I do it? I have no clue. It was just something. That's how I work sometimes. It's like I find something, I obsess over it, and I just follow through and think maybe in the future, what is that? And this project, I had never shown it before. This is the first time it's been exhibited, but when I showed it to Shayna, she was like, this absolutely works. Like this is instrumental to then other projects that are further along in the exhibition.
Absolutely. And if we go to the next one, I mean, one of the things that's important is, of course, it's often when we see like photo books or we're looking at things in this like quasi-chronological way, it sort of obscures the fact that for all your obsession around something, and I'm in no way trying to deny that I think that that's very true, you're also working often on multiple projects. Like, projects will go on as this one does, for example, for many years or for well over a year, right? There's
Yes.
others we'll look at that span several years. Um, what I, think is interesting about this one is the way in which um, you found yourself interested in, people who, well, actually, why don't you explain it? Because
Sure. This body of work, Between Borders, is part of a trilogy of border works. And it starts with this documentation of the view of the border from this CCTV camera. And in this particular project, I'm looking at people and thinking of what are the other ways that the border operates, and what are these other ways in that it operates in a more cultural level and not in a news cycle kind of a way. So there's no news in people staying in Mexico when they live 5 minutes from the US border and have illegal access to the US. Nobody's telling that story because it's counterintuitive to this narrative that we've talked of, like that has been inscribed in our understanding of the American border, where everybody wants to go north. And suddenly there's this community that doesn't want to go north, that is comfortable in their habitat in this little ejido, just 5 minutes from the US border. And yet, with the access, they decide to not cross. They decide to stay in the Mexican side. So, again, a very simple, not newsworthy idea of what the border is and border and border life is. But for me, as somebody who lives close to the border, it was important to start representing the border in these other ways and create these alternative narratives to what the common understanding of border phenomenons exist.
And we'll get to Los Americanos in a moment here because that one will pick up on some of these ideas. But in the
Mhm.
next image, and people will be the possibly one of your most famous bodies of works, Carpoolers, and this is such a lovely installation of so many of these images. Um, and so well, actually, you essentially stood, interestingly, sort of like at the computer, looking at the camera at Big Bend in one place. Similarly,
Mhm.
here over many months, you stood in one place over I-85, if I'm correct,
Yes.
um, looking at it's a pedestrian overpass and
Yes.
looking down at uh, these pickup trucks that are regularly carrying people to work
Mhm.
in highly precarious or
Ways. Yeah.
potentially unsafe passenger conditions. But it's one of the things that you sort of discovered. It's so common, right? Like
Yes.
it's not as if this was something you had to force or something like, oh, let me see if I can catch one more of these. This was just constantly happening.
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
did you realize that?
And there are several things that happen with this series. One could have, like, I could have taken, I don't know, two, three pictures, and that was it. I could have shown that that was happening. And here's where understanding the way photography works and how the history of photography has addressed the different representations makes you look for loopholes as to what one can propose as something more contemporary. When you think about the thing of the 20th century that put photography at the poetic level of art and painting, it's the idea of the decisive moment. This moment that it has so many things simultaneously happening at the same time, and the photographer is such a sensible human being that he can capture or they can capture that precise moment, right? And so with this series, if I would have just taken one or two pictures, I think I would have been framed as that, as, oh my God, what a poetic image, this decisive moment that Alejandro was able to capture. But as I'm not interested in that, I like I like my Cartier-Bresson kind of looking works. I was more interested in this is, like you mentioned, this is a phenomenon. This is something that is more than just me being a good photographer. This is the reality of a culture, of a city, and of many places, not only Mexico. It happens in many places around the world, but it is a thing. So how do I debunk my poetic gesture and create a phenomenon of what I'm actually picturing? And that was through accumulation. It's through repetition, and it's through the undeniability that this is something that is happening, and it's not me just being lucky and having a good shot. And
Yeah.
so this is one of the interesting things of, again, the way that I think of photography. I'm interested in the subject matter, but I'm also interested in how does that work within the scope of the history of photography and the way that photography has been used as either a communication medium or as an artistic medium.
Yeah.
And so there's that, and of course the subject matter is super personal. My grandfather used to be a construction worker, so this is a scene that was close to me because I saw it since I was a little kid. My grandfather would have people come over to his house. He was the maestro, and they would jump in the back of the truck and they would drive off in his Ford F-150. And it was something that I saw since I was a little kid. And it was something that I did also when we would go to the rancho, or he would pile us in the back of the truck and take us to wherever we were going. So it was something that was close, personal in that way. I'd like to mention it because this is the sometimes the challenge for a photographer is that are you relying on the anecdote in order for the works to work, or are you relying on the images to do the job of conveying whatever it is that they're conveying without this anecdote? I slip it in there, this personal anecdote, just for fun, but that's not what the work is about. That's the fire within me and why I connect, and why I'm kind of willing to, take a year to document these things, because I have an emotional connection. But I understand that the images by themselves are saying a different story. They're not saying, "Oh, Alejandro is part of a family that has been in construction for many years." My uncle was also in construction. He had two construction companies. My grandfather would take me to construction sites and make me mix cement and tell me, "This is the real life. This is what it means to be, a human being. Hard work from dawn to night." And yes, all that is there, but the reality is that it shows that there is a precarious way of developing cities in Latin America where people solve their problems however they can, even when it means risking their life traveling this way. Why would they travel this way if the public transportation were cheap, efficient, fast? It doesn't make sense. So it's beautiful how if you take a moment, you can see that this is more a symptom of something bigger and preoccupations that have been in the back of my mind for several years.
Totally. If we look at the next one, it's worth it maybe, especially because you've just been talking about what the image means, to take a moment with one of the images, one of the photographs, in part because early when you were first sort of studying photography, one of the things you talk about is the kind of mind-blowing moment you had when you realized that a photograph could mean so many different things. You were looking in a, class setting at a photograph and unpacking it with students, with teacher, with the teacher to uncover different angles of
Yes.
approach. And um, and so I thought I would actually maybe put you on the spot a little bit, right?
Sure.
And like, yes, so I know I think there's the personal in this one. We can read this from that, knowing that anecdote, we can read this personally. What are some of the other ways, just to model it for the audience, that this image could be read to you?
Sure. So kind of a little bit of what think of it as image as a symptom, or the photograph as a symptom of something else. If one in that first years of studying photography, one of the things that amazed me was that one could ask different questions of an image. What is the political context in which it was taken? What is the cultural context in which it was taken? Is there a psychoanalytical aspect to it? Is there, an economical aspect that can be read with an image? And that, I think that understanding that the picture can mean many things depending on context, depending on placement, depending on scale. It's something that I'm attracted to. A photograph, and maybe a contrarian in me, the idea that photography is, or not even a contrarian. I'm embracing the difficulty of photography, and when you think of an image, a photographic image, it's so descriptive, it's so representational. How is it possible that it can have different meanings? Isn't that a contradiction? Like there's something that doesn't add up when you think about that. Even an identity photograph, one that you have in your passport or your license, one can read an emotional state in that image. And yeah, its function is as an identity picture, but it has an emotional context. It has a personal context. And so I don't know, I like to prod that. And I experiment with that in books, in the way that, when you think of a book, it's a fixed narrative. There's a beginning, there's an ending. You cannot read the book outside of that beginning and ending. And so where you place that image, what image you place next to it, what scale the image has on the page, all those things change the meaning of the photograph. If you think of it on the wall, the same. If you put an image by itself, it's commanding that it's read as a single statement, as a single narrative. But put that same image next to three or other images, and how you space those images between each other, there's a connotation of it. I want you to read that they have an implication of being read together or not.
Totally.
Yes or not. So that there is that malleability of photography, and maybe all images, each with a person, like a different characteristic, but images can shift and be malleable depending on context and how you present them.
Yeah. If we go to the next one, I think it will pull out some of that stuff. And I'm going to start moving us a little bit faster through the next couple bodies of work,
Oh,
because I know we're going to talk about them
oh
as
my God, yes.
but I mean, and even just to be more precise, like I think one of the things is, when we start to bring an angle of approach, what we're trying to do amidst all the information you're describing exists in a photograph is essentially create a hierarchy of emphasis for our own interpretation, right?
Mm,
Like there's so much stuff there. In a certain way, it's all on the same flat plane. We're choosing to bring out particular aspects of it. And the photographer's formal design maybe helps us do that in certain ways. I think this presentation sort of speaks a little bit to the import of how you position images next to each other. Just stay on that one for a second. On the left, we see these, the two people sit like right next to each other. And then we have a set of 4 images where we have one person in each image. By themselves, that could be 4 people who don't touch each other and don't connect, but have been grouped together. But there's something about that image of the 2 people together right next
Yes.
to it that suggests maybe these 4 are more of a group than they are apart, right? It's like
Yes.
that's some of the ways in which relations, but when images are situated next to each other.
Yes.
This is another really important body of work that speaks back to Between Borders,
Mhm.
because this is a body of work that is about the many Mexicans who have US citizenship but choose to live in Mexico.
Yes.
Again, disrupting the narrative around everyone wants to be in the United States. If you are like having citizenship equals wanting to live in whatever the image is of the great United States. And going to the
Yes.
next one, I'm just going to move us along. Sorry, Alejandro.
Go, go, go.
We will all connect. Which then brings also back to some of what we were talking about in the sort of like this this kind of gentrifying that happens at the beginning of the 21st century, this sort of like flattened, idealized image of what, the safe home environment, like town environment would
Yeah.
be like. And so this body of work sort of speaks to both this like rampant growth of um, neighborhoods and of the sort of suburban landscape, um, but also just feels so strongly like it connects back to some of those images we looked at the very beginning by putting it together, right? You're
Yeah.
talking about people who are living in this idealized, like this the suburban ideal, and yet it's
Yes.
not.
Yeah.
I will. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and just to like again hyperlinking projects and ideas with the Americanos again thinking of what is this idealized state of being an American, and here are these Mexicans that are American but decide not to be living in the U.S. And there those are border issues. And even here in Suburbia Mexicana, these are also border issues because we are tropicalizing the ideal of home ownership that the US has been, propaganda or is that even a word? But
Yeah.
pushing propaganda of what home ownership should be for the rest of the world. And of course, being our northern neighbor, the pressure is real. And we've adapted this suburbanization without the understanding of the mechanisms, social, environmental, and infrastructural, in order for that to be a successful tropicalization of the suburban dream. So these are all connections with the border issues and what it means to have this, neighbor to the north that is a propaganda machine telling us what an ideal life is. What does it
And
mean?
if
Yeah.
we go to the next slide, it'll connect because, and I'll just very briefly say, I highly recommend the essay by Horacio Fernandez
Oh,
in the
yeah.
book that is about housing in Mexico, its position in the Constitution, the debates around it. It's a beautiful essay. It's so easy to read, and it's incredibly informative. But also alongside that suburbanization is the fact that there's so much detritus and waste that gets produced as a part of a kind of homogeneity because there's less care given to the individual structure. And in Lost Rivers, though obviously Mexico has been dealing with enormous environmental issues and pollution, you're walking along the sun, no,
Santa Catarina.
is the Santa Catarina River.
Mhm.
And you can't see it here, but it's just this walk that is just presenting all the trash, all the waste, all the detritus that had been removed, of course, from that Ciudad series, right?
Yes,
So it's like the
exactly.
flip of this idealized architectural construct is then being mirrored here with this environment that is filled with the detritus, both of like all of which we're ignoring. Um, and that's going to lead me to Fragmented Cities, which takes us back in time to this project from much earlier, because this is then a body of work that becomes so important to accumulations. Um, and so, can you just actually very briefly, I'm going to make you be very brief here, Alejandro,
Yes.
just tell us quickly in a sentence or two about this project?
Yes, so fragmented cities is basically that understanding of that tropicalization of suburban ideals onto the Mexican landscape. And I was just obsessed with how suddenly, 2005, I was living a deja vu of the images that I had studied about American suburbanization in the 1960s and 70s. And these, these photographers, I was admiring how they were photographing and addressing these ideas, and suddenly I was in those landscapes, but into the south of them, and it was just an emotional connection to here's something that is about the history of photography, but it's also about something that was going to transform who we are as Mexicans, and and in this phase, I was very much enamored and connected with the idea of how documentary photography can address these issues and propose maybe an attention to things that if we don't fix, they are going to come and bite us in the ass. And, the proof is in the pudding. And right now, Monterrey and where these pictures were taken were, one of the most polluted cities in Latin America, in the Americas, actually. So it was this unsupervised growth and idealized push of what homeownership can do for people without thinking of the consequences of pushing that narrative.
Yeah. And we'll go to the next image very briefly. This is Without Walls.
Mhm.
It sort of speaks for itself, but I think you'll probably touch on it. I want to keep going to the next one. And this one we're going to zoom in on for a moment because I think, you know, from a distance, it's not necessarily clear what it is you've captured here. And so we have to get really close to it, which I think is an affective disposition that you force on the viewer in relationship to what it is you're presenting. So can you just tell us about that?
Sure. So Without Walls, that whole project is the third part of the series of border issues. And here I'm looking at the physicality of the wall and how it integrates into the landscape of a city. And this is Tijuana and Playas de Tijuana. And the border has become part of how people see their place and how they see the themselves through place. And it was just a shocking thing how being there over and over, I was going to Tijuana for a lot of things, and actually the Americanos was also photographed there, and constantly everywhere you look, there's physical divide that is running through the city, running through the landscapes, and I wanted to talk about that physicality. And there was an opportunity. I was working with Ana Fernandez, another artist. She had painted the wall blue with a Pantone color that's exactly the same color as the San Diego skyline. And so she made the border wall kind of disappear by painting it blue on the Mexican side. And I was working with her, I was taking pictures, and her mother was actually part of a group of people who created a little garden that is a bi-nation garden. There's half of it is in the US, half of it is in Mexico. And she was telling me about a family where the mother is in Mexico and the daughter is in the US, and how they try to meet every week on the weekends to, touch them, fingertip touch themselves. And I kind of asked if it was possible for me to photograph them. And she introduced me to the family. And what you're seeing here is on the left, I'm physically in Mexico, and the daughter is physically in the US. And I photographed her shadow, how the mother sees her every time they meet weekly. And then the next day, I traveled to the US, and I'm physically in the US. And this is the mother physically on the Mexico side, and I photographed the shadow of the mother on the other side. And for me, at that time, I was going through a lot of personal issues of separation, and this was something that was it was something that moved me in a profound way. And I tend to cry every time I talk about this, so I'm not going to talk about that specific part of the project, but there's this pain that is part of being in this place, and understanding how people cannot be together, and it's just because of this physical thing that's dividing our geographies is just unbearable to witness. But I thought it was really important to capture it this way, almost like a presence of the pain that is imposed by this wall that is, put
Yeah.
there in the middle of the city.
Yeah, it's an incredibly moving diptych, these two images together. And uh, I am, not even having all of that, it's just profoundly moving. And so
Mhm.
to that, I just want to say thank you. It is a rare moment of just being able to express all of that. Um, with that, it seems appropriate then to go into the next image, which is actually just briefly going to pause to talk about the fact that, um, the so much of your work over the years has been photo books. Um, and I'm wondering if you could just speak briefly about how it was similar and different to work on photo books, which has a similar sort of gathering approach and sorting
Mhm.
um, from, working with Shayna on this exhibition.
Yeah. So one thing that I've been working, let's say, in different stages in my career. The first one was very documentary, very, again, like I mentioned, enamored with the idea of how an image can impact social understanding of people, place, a phenomenon. And then I have this middle practice that is very much oriented to the print form. And why I became obsessed with photography books, and I've published 28, 29 books now. And there's something about uh, two things. The fixed narrative that once a book is published, there is an understanding of a beginning and ending, and that I'm suggesting the way that I want the viewer to read the story. And when you think of For the Wall, yes, there is, the images are fixed, but the body is moving. And so the way that one comes into the work, it always changes. And the book, yeah, you can start at the middle, you can start at the end, but the story is always the same. It always starts and ends the same. And so that idea was very interesting to me because of that dilemma that I was mentioning before, that photography is so simple, so indexical, yet it's so complex in understanding what it means. So if I have this apparatus, this system where I can suggest a beginning and an ending of how to read the story, it felt like an upgrade of how photography can work as a medium. And so I became obsessed with that, and I've experimented with many things in terms of design, in terms of typography, scale, and also there's that flexibility, or there's that expandability of photography as a material, because a book, you have to handle it, and the cover means something. The Is it hardbound? Is it softbound? Are the pages, soft? Are they rugged? Are they stiff? Are they soft? All those things are subconscious messages that you're sending. And ideally, here's where form and content kind of integrate to each other. Are you capable of diluting the message to the form itself? Can the form be as strong as the images themselves? And can those two be harnessed to create an even stronger cultural object? So that's something that's very attractive to me. And of course, and I'll finish with this, the idea of alternative histories or alternative stories. Like, there's no, a politician that's going to commission me to do a book about how, the suburbanization of Mexico has hurt our environment. And so it's up to me to put out these alternative stories that will never be part of the official history of what Mexico is. So here's my fuck you. Here's another way of thinking of Mexico and what it is. There's the history books, and they're just going to talk on a super high level. But then there's artists who can tell other stories of what Mexico is.
Yeah. On the next slide, you get a sense of the way in which the curation really encourages people to take time with these photo books, really inserts that part of your practice into the overall, which I think is lovely. If we look at the next one, it's a closer up of how some of the images are being installed, which I think is really powerful. And only in the interest of time am I moving us along,
Sure.
because I want us to get to accumulations. And in accumulations, you were taking the images from fragmented cities and then assembling them. I feel like it's somehow more assemblage than
Yes.
collage.
Yes.
So why? I mean, 2018 is a complicated political moment, given all the things we've just already been talking about, even if we find ourselves there again. So why in this moment did you choose to go back to fragmented cities
Yes.
and do this body of work?
So at this particular moment, I think it started in 26, no, let's see, 2016. When was the first Trump term? It was 2016? Yes.
Yeah. I mean, he inaugurated in 2017, but
Yes.
yeah.
The campaign started in 2016. It started there, actually, with the idea of how images shift meaning depending on the context and the political and cultural climate in which they're published or in which they're exhibited. So I started to think about that. And one thing that very quickly came to be is that you can't, like, an image doesn't stop. Its meaning doesn't stop. And so I took it even further into what happens when these known images of my fragmented cities works, what happens when I deconstruct them and rebuild them into these assemblages, as you mentioned. Do they contain the same meaning? And the answer for me was yes. They still talk about home ownership. They still talk about how the relationship between the man-made or the human-made and the nature in which it's constructed in. And so it was an aha moment of, if I can construct the image, why do I even have to photograph? Can I just use other people's photographs? And so I started a whole practice of appropriating images and creating these new narratives, or imposing new narratives on images that were not intended to mean what they're meaning once I've imposed my narrative onto them. So this was like I would say the spark of that. And of course, I was shy, and so I did it with my work first, and then I went ahead and I do it with everything right now. Like I've been collecting work, I've been using it, expanding on the idea of the internet as a camera. All those things have come together now, and a lot of the work that I do is more of less being a photographer that takes pictures, but a photographer that thinks of how photographs work as
Yeah.
images.
I wonder, Joshua, if we could skip to slide 22, because I want to just move us into photographic structures. I mean, I'm so glad that we landed here, right? Where it's like the question of photography is so much a part of the conversation these days. And, we think of the question of photography in terms of the photograph, but what you're trying to get us, I think, to see a little bit is that um, the question of photography is about the types of thinking that that the apparatus of photography as a field and its objects and its discourse get us to think through in other ways and contexts as well. Um,
Yes,
and when we get to photographic structures, I wanted just to sort of tip the hat back to your time at Fototeca, because of course, that was this moment when, aside from all of the sort of grunt work you were doing there, you also wound up actually having to go around for the sake of the archive and collecting photo albums, like going door to door, if I understand
yes,
correctly, and requesting complete strangers photo albums for the
yes,
sake of this kind of like archive of time and place.
yes,
And so here we find, again, this sort of this accumulation. If we go to the next one, Joshua, because part of what photographic structures is really doing, and then we go to the next one, and we can go back if you need to, Alejandro, is
sure,
cutting people out of
yes,
the images. Uh,
yes.
Go
And
ahead.
I love how you framed it. I'm smiling in my brain to the things that you commented. But yeah, there's one thing that happens with photography is that strangely, 200 years after its invention, we're still, I would say, illiterate as to what photography actually does. I think it's a trick. We now have it in our pocket. It's so everyday, so banal that we don't question an image, a photographic image, and we are photographing in a way that the medium imposes how to see the world. And so in photographic structures, I'm thinking about that. I'm thinking, wait, does the world actually look like this, or is this the photographic structure of how to look at the world? And so I'm creating these series, these typologies of how something looks. And in the identity panels is identity pictures, and there are versions of those different ways of photographing oneself. And it's once you see the repetition through different subjects, it starts falling apart. And it's like, this isn't the way that I want to see myself. This is how the camera sees me. And that I don't even know what that means, but there's something really exciting for me as an artist to think that I've uncovered that this machine is flattening the way we see ourselves, and it's the most proliferated way of representing the world is a photographic camera, and yet we don't question that. It's mind blowing to think about it, and also exciting at the same time.
Yeah.
And like this image, how does a vacation in Acapulco looks like in Mexico? And I've seen these images over and over, and because I buy a lot of archives, all these books, all these things in the back are all archives that I'm buying. And every time the same people, the mother, the son, the groupings, the kids, the picture of the kids, the picture of the dad with the son, they repeat themselves over and over again. And again, is that the camera that's doing that, or is it social media?
Yeah.
Is it, there are so many questions that surface from thinking of photography as this Machiavellic way of how to flatten who we are as a humanity. It's kind of,
Well, okay, hold on
yeah,
a second. I'm not quite sure that we can put that much um
photography.
on on photography itself. I think but also, and I do know to the Rail team that I'm over my time. I promise I'm only going to take a couple more minutes with Alejandro, and then the audience will get to have their say. If we could move to the next one, I just feel like this brings us in a really lovely way to this current body of work,
Mhm,
masking.
mhm,
Um, and so this is, I think, just a fantastic installation image. If we want to look at a close-up of it, it's on the next slide. But I thought that this was really interesting because, of course, masking is such a painterly activity.
yes, yes.
Um, and I think it speaks to the way in which, even some of what you were just saying is like trying to get back to some of the like material elements of the photograph and trying to, um, like force viewers in some way to struggle with the fact that this thing that is so seems so easy to look through is
Mhm.
constructed,
Yes,
is formed in these certain ways.
yes.
Um, and so with that, and I hope the audience will ask you more questions about this because I'm moving us so quickly to the last image that I wanted to close on so much, which is why I've done this. This is one of your earliest bodies of work. Um, and it is variations on yourself from I think you did this like 2003, 4, 2000.
Or 2004, yes.
Yeah, okay. So over 20 years ago, right? So it's
Yes.
you as chill dude, it's you as like in the classroom, it's there's one in which you're wearing a construction hat, which speaks to some of what
Yes.
you've talked about. And I just wanted to end by saying how it must be on some level charming to see these images that you produced of yourself 20 some years ago. And not only across your own life that you've lived in the last 20 years, 20 years of being this, accomplished photographer, but also a world that has changed so much in 20 years. And
Yeah.
so, um, wh who are you now?
This is such an important part of the exhibition, and it's situated at the beginning. And if you are open enough to read it as Charlotte has done and so kindly has read it, you can see how it's always been about trying to find myself. It's always been trying to understand who am I in this world. Even the cutouts that we just saw, it's about can I take these people out and can I put myself there? Am I part of Mexico? Am I part of this identity? I mean, this if you prod a little bit, you can see everything is about asking that question. How do I belong? How do I belong with people? How do I belong with places? How do I belong with homes? Where is my home now? And so, it's yes, it's very charming. I don't know if I could do this work today. Absolutely. I mean, the world is in a different place. My psychic world is in a different place. The beauty of things as an artist is you do things and sometimes you don't understand what they mean. And our job is to do it, to like be brave enough to do it and finish it and put that gesture out there. And I think that this body of work, 21 years into the future, is very instrumental to understanding my practice. I love seriality. I love thinking about who am I in this world. I want to understand that I like through identity, who am I? Who are my neighbors? Who are the people that I love? Who are my friends? So yeah, anyways, I'll finish with that. I think it's a great place to end.
Alejandra, thank you so much. Honestly, I could keep going, but out of respect for the many other people in the room who have questions for you, I'm going to hand it back over to the Rail team. And thank you again.
Thank you, Charlotte.
Thank you both, Alejandro and Charlotte, for that conversation. We're going to shift to audience Q&A. And I encourage folks in the audience, if you do have a question for Alejandro, you can submit using the link in the chat that Maggie just put. Our first question comes from Frank in the audience, and Frank asks, Alejandro, do you consider your work more of a historical chronicle or a personal rolling narrative?
Um, I think it definitely it's all about doing things for me first and being excited about doing that because if not, as an artist, I'm constantly depressed, constantly doubting myself. So I need something to feed me. So it's always personal. And inadvertently, I do understand how those images will work historically. So I'm conscious of that, but first and foremost, I do all my work for myself. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that
Hey,
answer.
Hey, Mary. Hi, how you doing? Good to see you.
Our next question comes from Anne, and Anne asks, what is your printing setup? Are you printing your work yourself, or do you work with a photo lab?
I've done both, but currently I work with a master printer that I've been working with for 15 years. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that question, Anne, and thank you for that answer. Something that I'm curious about, I know we touched on this a little bit before we went live here, but I was really struck by this sort of gathering of a bunch of different bodies of work at SF MoMA. And so I'm curious about how you approach staging your work in various cities, as like San Francisco possibly has a different relationship to the border or some of the sort of
Mhm.
content that you're photographing or thinking about through your work. How do you approach that? Do you find that there's sort of a universal presentation? Or yeah, I guess
Or will
how
it
are you thinking
change?
about that?
I'll send you an email when we start traveling the show. It'll open in June 4th in Madrid, and it's a whole different context. So I think we have the frame of how we want to see the work, but we I think we'll be there for 3 weeks, so we will be conscious of how does the work translate for that specific city and for the space itself.
Well, I'm looking forward to that email, and I'm so looking forward to all the other places that this show travels. That concludes our audience Q&A for today.
Wait,
Um,
can I
oh,
ask another question?
absolutely, absolutely.
Um, one of the things that I didn't get to that I really wanted to talk about, and you just talked about working with a master printer for 15 years. It's not just that there's so many people um in your work, right, that you are photographing others, but actually, you talked about working with Ana Fernandez, right? Like
Mhm.
you are constantly, engaging and supporting maybe learning from other artists and photographers.
Yes.
And we didn't talk about, your work with Fellowship and Obscura and so
Mhm.
forth, but like it seems as if that's a really important part um of some kind
My
of bi like
practice.
bigger photographic practice than just the
Yeah.
making of an image. And so I was just wondering if you would say something about that.
Sure. I think I've always been inclined to like teaching and working with other artists. I had a photo school for several years. Then I started Los Sumergidos imprint with Carlos, where we print photo books by Latin American artists. And during the pandemic, I had the opportunity to think of expanding how I support other artists. Where does that come from? I was helped by other photographers and other artists in my development. I was cared for and loved, and people, were kind enough to show me the hows of things. And so being a photographer in Latin America is not an easy thing in terms of getting your work out there. And I've had the privilege of having found ways to show my work in Latin America and outside Latin America. And so I just don't feel like I should keep that with me. So I started with the imprint. Then in the pandemic, I started Obscura and then Fellowship, which is more of, let's say, digital distribution of artworks. And I don't know, there's something exciting about thinking of one's practice through the work of other people. And I don't have the capacity to produce even more than what I normally produce. And so I'm living vicariously through the projects of other artists I work with. And I get as excited with my work and with their work. Like when an artist comes up with a project they want to release or publish, and I connect with it, I feel I'm doing that project too, and that I'm growing in terms of how I understand the world and how I understand art. And these past few years, I've developed a whole practice of understanding digital art and digital distribution and how the internet is a place to think of art and the way that we consume art today. So, and again, it's not a coincidence. I was prodding with ideas of the internet, but then it was like, oh my God, there's this whole practice that, comes from the 1960s about thinking of digital images and how, computers can create images and code can create images. I had no clue that that was there. And suddenly I was stuck in my house and because of COVID, and I started finding this whole new arena of thinking of gestures through digital mediums. So it's been an exciting practice. I think it is a phase of my career that I am more a promoter and I don't know if I can call myself a full curator, but I'm curating-ish things, and I love it. I really enjoy that part of my practice now.
Thank you so much for that question, Charlotte, and thank you for that answer. As you were giving the answer, we received another question. This one comes from Barbara, and it dovetails quite nicely with what you were just mentioning. She writes, as a curator, you have an exceptional insight into other artists' work, helping them to gain perspectives on their own work. But as an artist, do you create work that you do not necessarily understand at the time?
Oh yeah. I mean like those self-portraits, I thought they were just self-portraits, but they were so much more. And I think art making is about making decisions. And that was a decision that I'm going to do this. I don't know exactly what it is, but I have an intuition that there's something there that I need to pursue. There's many things that stay in the, in the corner and never have, I never show, because I do come back and reflect. Is this something that actually proposes something? Does it contribute to the bigger idea I have of my own practice? And if it doesn't, I leave it on the side. But I've done a lot of works that I have no clue what I did, but the intuition part of my practice, I try to pay attention to it too. I have my like rule-based kind of things where I'm setting things, but then the understanding isn't always in sync. And that's fine, I think.
Thank you so much, Barbara, for that question, and thank you, Alejandro, for such a thoughtful response. Today, we're going to close our program with a reading, and so I'm going to kick it right back over to you, Alejandro.
Oy. Okay. I'm just gonna read the first okay. You need to go read the rest of this text because it's really interesting and very telling of where I am thinking about digital images. What might be more interesting is to consider how the very properties of spreadability that characterize digital objects can be turned to advantage to make them collectibles as well. Paradoxically, an object whose image is very widely spread is a rare object in the sense that few objects have their images spread widely. This can be exploited to create value in art objects that are not in the traditional sense rare and singular. The future of collecting may be less in owning the thing that nobody else has and more in owning the thing that everybody else has. This is part of a beautiful text by Mackenzie Work called My Collectible Ass. It was published on eFlux. Definitely recommend to read that to expand your understanding of what collecting art in the 21st century means.
Thank you so, so much. And thank you both again, Alejandro and Charlotte, for such a wonderful conversation today. Thank you, Alex and Shayna from SF MoMA for their support in preparing for today's event. We'd also like to thank Tiger Foundation for sponsoring our NSE program and making these weekday conversations possible, and for their support of our growing archive, which you can view on the Rails YouTube channel. The Rail has been free and independent for 25 years. A donation directly supports our writers, production staff, and operations. Support our work through the link in the chat. And if you're available, join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for a conversation with Candace Hopkins and Jamie Powell on the event of the release of Native Visual Sovereignty, a reader on art and performance. And as is Rail tradition, you can now unmute and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you so, so much, everyone, for coming out.
Goodbye. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you,
Thank
thank you.
Thank you, Alejandro and
Thanks,
Charlotte.
Charlotte. Thank you,
Alejandro.
Alejandro.
Bye-bye.
Great conversation. Thank you so much.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.